A group of gym bros mocked Keanu Reeves' wooden cross necklace the moment he walked through the doors of the weight room. They saw only an outsider, someone too old, too quiet, too different to belong. But what happened next, and the quiet act Keanu made in front of the entire gym, will reach into your chest and hold your heart still. Friends, let us know in the comments under what conditions you watch this video. In the background, while working, or during lunch. Also, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow another emotional story will be waiting for you. In a gym tucked into the heart of a typical California suburb, everything pulsed with competition. The air was thick with sweat, testosterone, and the constant pressure to prove yourself. To others, but mostly to your own reflection. Chrome machines gleamed under fluorescent lights, mirrors stretched wall to wall, and heavy bass shook the floor like a war drum. This wasn't just a place to train, it was a proving ground, a coliseum. Muscles, egos, and reputations clashed here every single day. Guys in over-ear headphones pushed through their sets, like each rep determined their destiny. In one corner, 3 regulars held court: Travis, Jake, and Luca. Same towels, same protein bottles, same relentless one-upmanship. Loud, cocky, and completely in their element, they thrived on dominance. Every comment they launched was a jab, a challenge, a laugh that left someone else a little smaller. When the gym door opened, no one paid attention at first. But then, a lull in one of the lifting zones, a faint whisper, and heads began to turn. He entered quietly. A man in his 50s, dressed in a plain gray t-shirt, loose workout pants, and a faded baseball cap. Over his shoulder hung a worn duffel bag that looked more like it carried memories than gear. But the thing that stood out most wasn't his age or his clothes. It was the small wooden cross that hung from a black cord around his neck. Simple, weathered, unmistakable, especially in a place obsessed with aesthetics. Travis was the first to crack. "Yo, check it out. We got ourselves a traveling preacher." Jake chuckled, unable to resist. "That necklace? What is this, a cult audition?" Luca, the youngest and most eager to impress, piled on. "That's not exactly pre-workout vibes, bro." They weren't shouting, but they made sure their voices carried, loud enough to sting, loud enough to be cruel. But the man didn't flinch, didn't even turn his head. He simply walked past, calm and measured, and stopped at the nearest open machine. He pulled out a towel, old but clean, laid it down, and began his warm-up. His movements were focused, deliberate, like someone who didn't need an audience, someone who wasn't there for attention or admiration or Instagram. He moved like he belonged to himself. And somehow, that bothered them more than anything. They were used to being the kings of the room, the loudest, the strongest, the center of it all. But this guy with crow's feet near his eyes and serenity in his stare, he didn't play the game. And that made him dangerous. Keanu Reeves paid no mind to the jokes. His gaze stayed locked on the mirror, but not like the others. It wasn't about flexing. It was as if he was looking through it, into something deeper. Memory, grief, peace, none of which could be measured in pounds or sets. But that quiet tension, the invisible storm he carried with grace, it was building. And soon, it would break. The gym music was pounding louder now. Bass reverberated through the floor. Dumbbells slammed against the rubber mats, like someone trying to break through reality with raw metal. Travis, Jake, and Luca kept circling the bench press, fueled by ego and energy. This was their zone, their stage. Others in the gym trained quietly, but everyone knew who held the spotlight. The unspoken rule was clear. Whoever lifts the most owns the room. Luca decided to go all in. The youngest of the three, he was the most eager to prove he belonged. He'd already completed a few heavy sets, each time earning shouts of approval. "Let's go, bro. Push it." "That's what I'm talking about." Jake had his phone out, filming the next set. Luca turned it into a performance, locking eyes with himself in the mirror, shouting, pausing the barbell dramatically on his chest for effect. But something changed on this final round. He pushed through the 5th rep, racked the bar, laughed, then sat up quickly, and everything shifted. His hands began to shake. He tugged at his tank top, pressing a hand to his chest. His eyes darted around in panic. His breathing turned ragged, erratic. He gripped the edge of the bench like the world was tipping over. The music kept thumping, but a few people nearby started to notice. "Hey, you good?" someone called. Luca couldn't respond. His jaw was trembling now, his arms out of control. He sat there, hunched over, clutching his head, breath spiraling into chaos. A trainer nearby caught it and rushed over. His reaction was quick and professional. He reached out toward Luca's shoulder, but someone else was already there. Keanu. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood beside Luca with that same calm presence he'd carried since he arrived. But this time, something new surfaced in his eyes. Certainty. A quiet, steady confidence. "I know what to do," Keanu said gently to the trainer. "Let me." The trainer hesitated, surprised. But there was something about the way Keanu said it. Not a demand, not arrogance, just quiet truth. He stepped back, unsure why he trusted him, but he did. Keanu knelt beside Luca. The gym had gone still. Conversations faded, movement stopped. Even the music seemed muffled somehow, like the room itself was holding its breath. "You're not alone. I'm right here. Breathe with me. In and out." His voice was soft. No commands, no panic, just presence. He placed a hand gently on Luca's shoulder, not to restrain, not to direct, just to be there. Luca trembled, his eyes welled with tears, but something began to shift. He inhaled, then exhaled, slowly, then again. Jake lowered his phone. The recording stopped. Travis stood frozen. The trainer watched in silence. Around them, people stayed still, not out of confusion, but reverence. Keanu kept speaking, calm and grounded. "You're doing great. I've got you. You're breathing steady now. Just stay with me. We'll do this together." Luca's shoulders started to relax. His hands stopped shaking. His eyes, still glassy, finally lifted to meet Keanu's. He didn't speak, just nodded, grateful and stunned. Jake whispered under his breath, to no one in particular. That was something. And it was. In a gym obsessed with pounds lifted, that moment of breath, stillness, and compassion weighed more than any record ever set. No one was laughing at the cross anymore. No one was filming. They were just silent, because they'd witnessed something real, something human, and it changed them. The silence in the gym lingered for a few more seconds, as if time itself was unsure whether to move forward. The air pulsed with unexpected stillness. No clanging weights, no music, no banter. Just Luca's uneven breathing, gradually settling, and Keanu's gentle voice, not demanding attention, just being. Luca had lowered his head, eyes hidden. His shoulders still trembled, but the panic was gone. What remained was exhaustion, deep, soul-level fatigue. And then, the first step forward. Travis, the same guy who had laughed the loudest minutes ago. He slowly walked toward Keanu and stopped in front of him. Not aggressive, not performative, just honest. No mask. "We acted like complete jerks," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." His voice wasn't confident, but it was sincere. No one had asked him to say it. No camera was rolling. It came from inside. Jake stood a little farther back, gripping his phone. The screen was black now. He stepped forward too, scratched his head, swallowed hard. "You could have just walked away," he said. "But you actually saved him." Keanu glanced between the two of them. There was no triumph in his face, no victory, just quiet presence. He didn't speak right away. His eyes shifted back to Luca, still sitting there, arms wrapped around himself. Not crushed by weight, but by fear. Keanu leaned slightly and said gently, "Come on, let's get you some air." He offered his hand, and Luca, trembling slightly, took it. He stood slowly, cautiously, like he wasn't sure if the ground would hold. But it did, because Keanu was there. Not as a savior, not as a hero, just a human being who showed up when it mattered. From the cardio section, a guy in a no pain, no gain tank, nodded toward Keanu. "Respect, man." Someone nearby echoed it. Others said nothing, but their faces were different. Warmer. A quiet ripple of respect moved through the gym. It wasn't applause, it was recognition. True and deep. Keanu walked Luca toward the exit of the main floor. Travis and Jake followed behind. No jokes, no swagger, just silence. Their eyes didn't hold the same bravado. They carried something else now. Shame, yes, but also humility. Maybe even the desire to understand more. Luca moved slowly, leaning just a bit on Keanu. His body was recovering, but his eyes were still heavy. Wet. Full of what couldn't be said. He didn't need to speak, because it was clear to everyone now. In this gym, where muscles were worshipped, someone else had won today. Someone who didn't come to prove anything. Someone they laughed at, but who reached out instead. And so they followed him. Not as leaders, but as people learning, for the first time, what real strength looks like. The locker room was silent. Not the same kind of silence as the gym floor. This one was heavy, sacred almost. The only sound came from a dripping shower stall nearby, each drop landing like a metronome in the stillness. Luca sat on the bench, wrapped in a towel, elbows resting on his knees. His head was down, sweat still clinging to his hair, his cheeks flushed, eyes blank. He looked exhausted, not from lifting, but from breaking. And beside him stood someone who wasn't letting the brokenness fall apart. Keanu leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes calm and quiet. He didn't rush to speak. He was just there, present. And that was enough. The locker room door creaked open. A trainer peeked in, concern etched on his face. "Everything all right? Do you need me to call someone?" Keanu nodded and replied softly, "It's okay. I'm with him." The trainer hesitated for a second, then gave a slight nod and gently closed the door behind him. Jake and Travis stood a few steps away. For the first time, they weren't cracking jokes. They weren't filling the silence. They were listening. And it was that silence that made Jake finally ask, "How do you know how to deal with this?" There was no challenge in his tone, no sarcasm, just the genuine question of someone who wanted to understand. Keanu reached up and gently touched the wooden cross hanging from his neck. His fingers traced its edges, soft, almost reverent. Then he spoke. "My sister. She used to have panic attacks, often. We would breathe together. I'd hold her hand like this, help her find her rhythm again. At first, I was scared. Then I learned. One day," his voice dropped. "One day she gave me this cross. Not long after she passed." Silence fell again, like a weighted blanket. No drama, no performance, just words, and the gravity they carried. Travis sat down beside Luca. He stared at the floor for a few seconds, then said softly, "I made fun of that cross, but it's a memory he wears." His voice was barely audible. No jokes, no bravado, just understanding and regret. Keanu looked at him. There was no judgment in his gaze, no superiority, just presence and peace. "Strength isn't how much you can lift," he said gently but firmly. "It's whether you can lift someone else when they've fallen." Luca finally looked up. His eyes shimmered with tears. But not from fear, from relief. From the realization that someone had stayed. That someone had seen him. "You really did lift me up, thank you," he whispered. And in that quiet, once filled with noise, ego, and swagger, only gratitude remained, understanding, and stillness. The kind of stillness where real change begins, not through speeches, not through show, but from soul to soul. A week had passed. The gym had returned to its usual rhythm, blaring music, sweat-covered bars, echoing trainer shouts, motivational grunts, mirrors filled with people chasing stronger versions of themselves. But something was different, not in the layout or the equipment, in the details, in the glances, in the silence that no longer felt threatening. When the front door opened and Keanu stepped inside again, the front desk attendant looked up and smiled. "Good to see you again." Keanu nodded back. Same calm presence, same faded baseball cap, same old backpack slung over one shoulder, and around his neck, the same wooden cross on a black cord. But this time, people noticed him differently. Travis was on the treadmill, lost in his stride and his playlist. But when he saw Keanu, he pulled out one earbud and raised a hand in a quiet, respectful wave. His eyes said it all. This wasn't for show. It was real. In the stretching zone, Luca sat cross-legged on a mat, calm and centered. But now, something new wrapped around his wrist. A thin black cord holding a small wooden cross. Simple, humble, and just as noticeable now as it had been on Keanu. And then Jake. He walked up to Keanu, headphones still hanging around his neck, cap in hand. A subtle gesture of respect. He looked Keanu in the eye and said, "Now, when I look at people, I think a little differently. That's because of you." Keanu simply nodded, and in that nod was more weight than 1,000 motivational speeches. He continued on. No turning back, no need for recognition, just the same steady, quiet steps. And then, as if it came not from outside but from somewhere deep within, one last thought echoed like a whisper. You never know what someone's carrying, but you can always give them space to breathe next to you. That's real strength, not made of iron, but of heart. We don't always know what lies behind something simple, behind a black string with a cross, behind a silent gaze, behind a modest person who doesn't throw down challenges, but quietly changes everything by simply being present. This story isn't about heroics on a stage. It's about strength that reveals itself in the quietest of moments. The world often demands that we be tough, but sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay soft. Show humanity, extend a hand, bring stillness to places where everyone else is shouting. And you don't need to be a Hollywood star to do that. You don't need a famous name or grand titles. It's enough to be attentive, to notice, to stay close. Sometimes just to say, "I'm with you," or even to simply breathe together. Maybe that one small step will change someone's life. So if you ever find yourself near someone who's struggling, don't turn away. Don't rush to conclusions. You never know what someone is carrying, but you can always offer them a space where they can breathe beside you. And that is the beginning of real strength, the kind that doesn't live in gyms, but in hearts. Be sure to share your impressions of the story in the comments and write what conclusions you have drawn after listening to it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I wish you all a good mood and see you in the new video tomorrow.